Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, Africans. I hope you're faring well where you are, and if you ain't faring well, please fare well where you are. So, have you heard of the term gaslighting? Have you heard of your neighbors, your parents, your sisters, your siblings bring up this buzzword, gaslight? Now, gaslighting is is distorting someone else's reality to hide your crimes or to hide your sins, right? Like right now, it's the sun is shining, right? A gaslighter will tell you that it's not shining, it is raining, and it is your mind which is falsely lying to you about the reality. So you need to give your mind an update. That is a gaslighter. And the behaviors of a gaslighter are not much different from the behaviors of some of the Western civilization characters, right? These specific individuals who push the narrative that the Western civilization is the epitome of all civilization are liars, right? You know, they are quick to destroy civilization, and also at the same time, they are quick into coming here and telling us that they are the best, right? Look at the problem in the Middle East. Look at the problem in Libya. They told us Muammar Gaddafi was bad. Look at what happens to Libya right now. Congo, Lumumba, Patrice Lumumba. Look at what happened to him. We had Saddam Hussein. Even though he was bad, he did not have a weapon of mass destruction. I think they were trying to find a reason to exterminate him, right? Using their favorite tool called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. If you like, you can call it NATO, right? So these people are liars, and they are really good in lying. The one thing that prevents them from not lying is that they know that moment that they stop lying, they lose the respect. You see, they lose the respect that they once had, and so they have to continue lying. So we, the people who are being lied to, it is upon us to realize that we have been living a lie. It's up upon us to bring ourselves into the reality. Yes. So there is a man by the name Shahid Bolsen. I know he's not so much foreign to you. Probably you may have heard about him. He narrates how mischievous the West, some of them, can be in propagating false narrative in order to put themselves in the position of power. I want us to listen to him. I shall get back by the end of the video, where we shall also have a deep critical analysis. Let's dive in.
I'm ambivalent about it. Anytime that I've experienced something like this in the past, any sort of degree of relatively widespread notoriety or attention online, it's led to real world consequences, real world problems. Obviously, that's what generated the whole online internet smear campaign against me in the first place. The character assassination, the slander and the lies and so on. And all of that has real life consequences. So there's a degree of unease, I'll say. But how I feel is irrelevant. I think that those videos resonated with a lot of people because it reflects the fact that there is a worldwide change underway, and not just among Muslims, and not even just among the people of the global South. People all over the world, including in the West itself, are recognizing that Western civilization is a failure. They're realizing that it is corrupt, that it is hypocritical, that it is immoral, that it is tyrannical and psychopathic. Now, most of the Muslim world and the global South has known this for a long time, and a lot of people in the lower class in the West have also known it for a long time. And certainly black people in America never didn't know it. But because the neoliberal system, the neo-imperialist system, you can say, is now treating even the Western lands as lands for conquest, lands to conquer. And now people in America and Europe are themselves feeling the subjugation that their civilization imposed all around the world. Now it's happening to them, writ large. There are millions and millions of people in the West who now want nothing to do with Western civilization anymore. They realize that it's rotten and that it's always been rotten. They realize that even the moral values and principles, so-called, that they were taught emerged from the Enlightenment were actually stolen from someone else. They were stolen from other cultures. They were stolen from other civilizations, particularly from the Muslims. So this civilization, Western civilization, is like an identity thief, pretending to be what it isn't. It's an impostor. It's a thug wearing the clothes of a nobleman. Or more accurately, it's a criminal dressed up like a policeman. And you've got a lot of real criminals dressed up like policemen over there. But as I said, across the global South, among the long-standing victims of the West, obviously none of this is a revelation. And it's not something new to Muslims, certainly. But there are a few things that are different now. Today, there's a sense that the West and that America is imploding. So the people in the global South and the Muslim world are seeing that their tormentor is starting to show weakness, is starting to look weak. And all he ever had over us was power. It was only his power that made people be quiet. It was only power that made everyone in the world nod their heads whenever he spoke. But now there's a glimmer of hope because they're starting to see weakness. Every crack and fracture that you see in Western society, you have to understand, from the perspective of the global South and from the perspective of the Muslim world, every crack and fracture in Western society is like a crack and a fracture in the wall of a prison cell, and you start to see daylight peeking through those cracks. And that's different. That's not something that we've seen before until now. And everyone in the world is seeing it at the same time. So there's a subsequent, as a result of that, there's a revival of confidence in the global South countries and in the Muslim world. There's less and less inclination to capitulate to the West and to try to emulate the West and to want Western approval. And there's greater and greater inclination to try to move forward independently. So I think that's probably why those videos resonated, or seem to have resonated with a lot of people. And for Muslims specifically, we're just tired, you know. For at least the last 20 to 30 years, you've been bullying us with the label extremist, telling us which kind of Islam was going to be all right with you, even while you were invading our countries, bombing our cities, killing our families. Somehow, you were still able to bully us into thinking that we were the violent ones. The West was like a murderer who stabs someone and gets the victim's blood all over his own clothes, and then he starts screaming, "Help, help, I'm bleeding." You know, you were covered in our blood, but acted like you were the one who was bleeding. And we bent over backwards. For the last 20 years at least, Muslims have been bending over backwards to try to assure you. And you tricked us with the promise of acceptance and approval. And acceptance and approval from you meant that maybe you wouldn't bomb us. Maybe you wouldn't lock us up in Guantanamo Bay. So you tricked us into thinking that we had to conform to your values, to your principles, just to prove to you that we were civilized people who deserve not to be bombed and not to be locked up in Guantanamo Bay. It was like, you know, when you try to access a website and you have to prove that you're not a robot, except it's a never-ending loop. Check this box to confirm you're a person. Now check this box to confirm you're a person. Now check this box and this box and this box and so on and so on and so on. And in the end, we never get accepted anyway. But during that whole process, over the last couple of decades, you showed us time and time again that the values and the principles that you wanted us to conform with, you don't even conform with. And we're going through this whole process of checking the boxes. And finally, you know, we're checking all of these boxes until finally we get to a box that says that we have to accept that we have to accept gay marriage, and we have to accept that women can have penises. And at that point, the whole Muslim world collectively had an epiphany. Oh, well, these people are just crazy. Like I said, Western civilization is an imposter. And in 2023, you've been thoroughly found out. There is almost no one in the world who doesn't know who you really are. And nobody in the world anymore is inclined to play along with this role play game when you're pretending to be what you're not. And this is important because to a great extent, the West was actually able to impose cognitive dissonance even on us, even on Muslims. Even while you were killing us, even while you were jailing us, even while you were torturing us, there was a lot of Muslims who still wanted to be like you. A lot of Muslims were mesmerized by your words to the extent that they would overlook your actions or make excuses for your actions because you talk so high and mighty, you know? You talked about such lofty morals. So it's disconcerting, it's disorienting because your actions have always been the polar opposite of what you talk about. But from 2001 to 2023, there's been a change. The lies of the West, the lies of Western civilization have become unsustainable. And the truth has become undeniable. And even millions of people in the West can see it now. They can see that it is an impostor civilization. They can see that you have only ever used morals and values as a camouflage, as a disguise. Like I said, what you have been doing to Muslim populations and populations across the global South, now you're doing to your own populations. So they can see you never believed any of that stuff about freedom and liberty and democracy. You don't even care if your own people starve. You don't care if your own people have a place to live. You don't care if they're sick. You don't care if they freeze in the wintertime. You don't care if they have clean drinking water. You don't even care if they mutilate themselves or mutilate their children. You don't care if your own people stop having babies and go extinct. It's all a sham. So the veil has been lifted and there's no putting it back. The wool has been pulled from over their eyes, from over the eyes of the world, and there's no pulling it back down again. But as I've talked about over and over again, my concern is that the societal implosion of the West is being misinterpreted and is being misunderstood by Muslims and by the countries of the global South. It's being misunderstood because we think it means that we're going to be free, that our oppressor, like I said, has become weak. But that's not exactly what's happening. The West isn't collapsing, it's being conquered. And it's being conquered by private sector power, by the owners and controllers of global financialized capital. And that same power wants to conquer us too, all over again, just as we're seeing the chance to be free. This is why I've said for years that you have to understand who the real powers are, who the real enemies are, because the decline of the West, the decline of American state power, does not mean the creation of a multipolar world. It's still a unipolar world. And the unipolar power is the private sector. It's private sector power. And it has more control over our lives than any state or than any state ever has. That doesn't mean that a multipolar world isn't possible. It is possible. But the only way that it can be pursued is by accurately understanding what the real power in the world is today, so that we can develop genuinely effective strategies for confronting that power and competing with that power and resisting that power and overcoming it and developing our own power. That's the only way. If you don't understand who you're fighting, there's no way you can win the fight.
So guys, after clearly watching this video, I think it's high time I give my perspective, as I promised, my deep critical analysis, right? And by the way, I recently did a video about this very same topic, about the myth of Western civilization. And now this is the hypocrisy of Western civilization. And also gathering from an understanding that has been given by our very own beloved Shahid Bolsen. So let's start. Western civilization for centuries has proudly projected itself as the moral compass of the world. It has been a champion of liberty, democracy, human rights, and progress. Is it really a champion of all this? Through its institutions, media, foreign policy, and economic systems, the West has constructed a narrative of exceptionalism, a belief that embodies the highest standard of human development and ethics. However, behind this facade lies a deeply entrenched hypocrisy, especially in its relationship with marginalized communities, Black people in the United States of America, Black people in Africa, and Black people outside the continent of Africa. Africans on the continent and other marginalized communities globally are so much being affected by white hypocrisy, or rather white civilization hypocrisy. It's all just a hypocrisy, a narrative that is there to fulfill the needs and the wants of some specific few while abandoning the needs and the wants of the majority. So this is the myth of Western moral superiority. The West, particularly nations like the US, Britain, and France, often position themselves as guardians of human rights and democracy. But this claim becomes hollow when positioned with the historical and present realities faced by black communities. First of all, we have colonialism and slavery. The wealth of Western nations was built on the backs of enslaved Africans and the plunder of African resources. From the transatlantic slave trade to the brutal colonial regimes in Congo, Kenya, Algeria, and beyond, the West's civilizing mission was rooted in dehumanization, genocide, and theft. The second one is selective humanitarianism. So it's not a total, it's a selective. The West has been quick to respond to crises in regions like Ukraine with open arms and solidarity, yet indifferent or hostile to the suffering of people in Haiti, Sudan, Congo, or Yemen. Why does empathy stop where black and brown skins begins? It's a question that only the white supremacist, or rather only the West civilization can answer. But we already know the answer. Maybe they don't. Now, the black American experience is a thing that we also must see, and the double standards of liberty. In the US, the so-called land of the free, black Americans have never truly known freedom in its full sense. We have institutional racism, from Jim Crow laws to redlining, mass incarceration, and police brutality. American institutions have persistently treated black lives as disposable. The murder of George Floyd in 2020 was not an isolated incident, but a symptom of a deeply diseased system. We will have economic disparities. Despite centuries of unpaid labor during slavery and systemic exclusion, post-emancipation, black Americans hold a fraction of national wealth. Reparations, though morally justified, are dismissed or mocked by mainstream policymakers. We have cultural appropriation versus cultural respect. The West often celebrates black culture, music, fashion, slang, but shows less interest for the people who create it. Black athletes and entertainers are cheered on stage, but demonized off when they speak truth to power. Right? So they like our music, they like our culture, but they don't like the blackness that comes with it. I think it's just a false narrative. If you don't like me, you don't like my things. That's how it goes, right? Africa and the West, a relationship built on exploitation. Africa, home to the vast natural wealth and vibrant cultures, remains shackled to a neo-colonial system upheld by Western powers. Aid as control. Western aid is often tied to conditions that perpetuate dependency, erode sovereignty, and favor Western corporate interest. Rather than empowering African nations, aid often reinforces structural subordination. Another one is military intervention and resource extraction. Under the guise of stability or counter-terrorism, Western nations have deployed troops which have overthrown governments and supported dictators, often to safeguard the mineral access, oil pipelines, or strategic influence. The last we have the IMF and the World Bank trap. These institutions, dominated by Western powers, have enforced policies, for instance, structural adjustment programs that gutted African public services, weakened agriculture, and prioritized debt repayment over human development. Right? So we have marginalized communities globally, the same play. Also, we have the marginalized communities globally, apart from the black. The hypocrisy of the West extends to other marginalized groups around the world. We have Palestine. While the West champions Ukrainian resistance, it often turns a blind eye or gives full support to Israel's occupation of Palestinian lands. The double standards are glaring and indefensible. We have indigenous people. From Canada to Australia to the US, indigenous people are marginalized, their lands stolen, their histories erased, and their communities subjected to systemic neglect and violence. The third, we have global South migrants. Western nations criminalized migrants from the global South while benefiting from their labor. They build walls and camps for Haitians, Syrians, or Somalis while offering refuge to Europeans with open doors, right? So we have the language of progress, a mask for injustice. Western hypocrisy is maintained through euphemisms and propaganda. Spreading democracy often means regime change and chaos. Humanitarian intervention masks military aggression. Development aid becomes a form of modern colonization. So we've also had some voices of resistance. Despite systemic repression, resistance persists across the black diaspora and across the marginalized communities globally. Black Lives Matter is not just a hashtag, but a cry against centuries of oppression, right? Pan-Africanism continues to advocate for unity and liberation beyond colonial borders. These movements challenge the West's moral authority and exposes its contradiction. They offer a vision of justice that transcends borders, race, and empire. So, I believe that Shahid Bolsen, even though he was speaking in the line of Muslims, I believe it cuts across even the non-Muslims, right? And why should this hypocrisy be debunked? Why should it be destroyed? Here is why. Truth and accountability being the first. A world built on lies cannot be just. Exposing Western hypocrisy is a step towards global healing and truth. The second is empowerment of the oppressed. Recognizing these double standards allows marginalized communities to organize, resist, and reclaim dignity. The third is global solidarity. Liberation must be international, from Gaza to Harlem to Kinshasa. Oppressed people must recognize their shared struggle. The fourth is ending exploitation. As long as the West can preach values it does not practice, injustice will thrive. Real change begins with dismantling these myths. And to conclude, the West cannot continue to claim moral superiority while actively contributing to the suffering of Black people, Africans, and marginalized communities across the globe, Its hypocrisy must be confronted, not out of bitterness, but for justice, truth, and real progress. Until the West acknowledges its historical crimes and ends its current complicity in global oppression, its claim to democracy and human rights remain hollow. It's time for a new moral order, one led by the oppressed, rooted in equity and based on unvarnished truth. Shahid Bolsen is a man of wisdom, a man of higher understanding, a man of higher knowledge. So while he speaks about the gaslighting the West has been providing for us, they stab you and they wipe themselves with your blood, pretending and now shouting that you have attacked them, right? Gaslighting the Muslims to believe that they are wrong, and instead it is them who are wrong, gaslighting those marginalized communities while they themselves are the wrongdoers. This is something that is problematic. This is something that needs to be addressed, and the hypocrisy must be debunked. Yes, I believe that you've gained value from all this, but if you have, kindly subscribe. I'll surely appreciate. And see you in the next one. Support me on Patreon if you may. I'll still appreciate. See you in the next one. Thank you.